The rain was relentless, hammering the roof of the old Victorian house in Syracuse like it wanted to break through. I stood at the window, watching the world drown, my breath fogging the glass as my heart pounded with a secret I wasn't ready to name. At 24, Ethan Caldwell, was about to face the man who'd haunted my thoughts for years, and he was walking up the driveway right now. His name was Julian Torres, my stepdad's best friend. A 32-year-old photographer with a laugh that could light up a room and eyes that seemed to see straight through me. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not today, not when I was alone, not when my stepdad, Greg, was stuck at a conference in Buffalo. But there he was, shaking off his umbrella, his dark hair slick with rain, his leather jacket clinging to his broad shoulders. I opened the door before he could knock, my pulse a wild drumbeat. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, almost cautious. "We need to talk." I'd known Julian since I was 16, when Greg married my mom and brought his chaotic, charming best friend into our lives. Julian was the kind of guy who made everyone feel special. Quick with a joke, always ready to listen, always there with a steady hand when life got messy. But for me, it was different. His attention felt like a spotlight, warm and dangerous, and I'd spent years dodging it, terrified of what it might reveal. I wasn't out. Not to my family, not to anyone. Syracuse wasn't exactly a haven for guys like me, and the weight of that silence was crushing. "Come in," I said, stepping aside, my voice steadier than I felt. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every creak, every breath. Julian set his umbrella by the door and ran a hand through his wet hair, his eyes locking onto mine. There was something new in his gaze, something urgent, unguarded. "You okay?" he asked, and I nodded, though I was anything but. He didn't move closer, but the air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. We ended up in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the worn leather couch. The rain kept up its assault outside, a perfect excuse for the tension coiling in my chest. Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped like he was holding himself back. "Ethan," he started, then stopped, his jaw tightening. "I've been waiting to catch you alone. There's something I need to say, and I don't know how you're gonna take it." My stomach dropped. I'd spent years analyzing every glance, every touch, convincing myself I was imagining things. Julian was straight, or so I thought. He'd dated women, talked about them casually, laughed off Greg's teasing about settling down. But now, with the rain sealing us off from the world, I saw something in his eyes that mirrored my own fear, my own longing. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his silhouette sharp against the gray light. "I've known you for 8 years, he said, not turning around. 8 years of watching you grow up, watching you hide. I see you, Ethan. I've always seen you." His words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. I wanted to run, to laugh it off, to pretend I didn't know what he meant. But I couldn't move. He turned then, his eyes fierce, unguarded. "I'm not supposed to feel this way," he said, his voice breaking. "You're Greg's stepson. You're too young. But I can't keep pretending I don't." He stopped, running a hand over his face. "I'm in love with you, Ethan, and I'm terrified you're gonna hate me for it." The world stopped. My heart was a riot, my thoughts a tangle of fear and hope. I stood, my legs unsteady, and took a step toward him. "Julian," I said, my voice raw, "I don't hate you." And then, because I couldn't hold it in anymore, I added, "I've felt the same way for years." The silence that followed was electric, fragile, like we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't take back. He closed the distance between us, his hand hovering near my cheek, not quite touching. "We can't," he whispered, but his eyes said something else entirely. And in that moment, with the rain roaring outside, I knew we were already too far gone. The rain didn't let up, and neither did the weight of what we just admitted. Julian's hand finally grazed my cheek, his touch so light it felt like a question. I leaned into it, answering without words, and for a moment we just stood there, two people caught in a truth too big for the room. "We shouldn't do this," Julian said again, but he didn't pull away. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, and I shivered, not from the cold. I was 24, old enough to know what I wanted, but young enough to feel the world's judgment pressing in. Julian was my stepdad's best friend, Greg's confidant, the guy who'd been at every family barbecue, every Christmas dinner. This wasn't just forbidden, it was a betrayal. "I know," I said, but my hands were already reaching for him, fingers curling into the damp leather of his jacket. "But I don't care," and I didn't. Not then, not with him so close I could feel the heat of his breath. He let out a shaky laugh, like he was trying to break the spell, but then he leaned in, and the world fell away. Our first kiss was tentative, a collision of fear and need. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of coffee and rain, and I felt my walls crumble. For years I'd locked my feelings away, convinced they were wrong, convinced I was wrong. But Julian's hands on my face, his quiet murmurs of my name, made me feel seen, really seen, for the first time. We pulled apart, breathless, and he rested his forehead against mine. "Ethan," he said, his voice rough, "this could ruin everything." I knew he was right. Greg was family, and Syracuse wasn't the kind of place where two guys could just be together without consequences. But I also knew I couldn't go back to pretending. "Let's figure it out," I said, my voice steadier now. "Just don't walk away." He nodded, his eyes searching mine, and for the first time, I saw the weight he'd been carrying too. The years of holding back, of hiding who he was. Julian wasn't out either, I realized. He'd been living in the same shadows I had. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking, in a way we never had before. He told me about growing up in Rochester, about the father who'd never accepted him, about the women he'd dated to keep up appearances. I told him about the nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever be brave enough to live my truth. The rain kept us cocooned, a temporary shield from the world outside. But the world wouldn't stay out forever. Greg was due back tomorrow, and with him the reality of what we'd done. "What do we tell him?" I asked, my voice small. Julian's face darkened, and he shook his head. "Nothing yet," he said. "We need time to figure this out." I wanted to believe him, but the fear was already creeping in, cold and sharp. That night, I lay awake in my room, replaying every moment. The kiss, the confessions, the way Julian's eyes softened when he looked at me. I wanted to hold onto it, to believe we could make it work. But deep down, I knew the storm wasn't just outside. It was coming for us. Morning broke with a hesitant sun, the rain finally gone but leaving a chill in the air. I found Julian in the kitchen, making coffee like it was any other day, but the way his hands shook as he poured betrayed him. "You sleep okay?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. I shook my head, and he sighed, setting the pot down. "Yeah, me neither." We were treading dangerous ground now, and we both knew it. Greg would be home by noon, and the house felt like a ticking clock. I wanted to reach for Julian, to pull him close and pretend we could stay in our bubble, but the weight of reality was crushing. "We need a plan," I said, my voice low. Julian nodded, but his silence said more than words could. We ended up at the park down the street, a quiet place with old oaks and a winding path. The autumn leaves were a riot of color, and for a moment, it felt like we could breathe. We sat on a bench, close but not touching, and I felt the ache of wanting him so badly it hurt. "I've never done this," Julian admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've never let myself want someone like this." His vulnerability broke something in me. I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together, and he didn't pull away. "Me neither," I said. "But I don't want to stop." He squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, and for a moment, we were just two guys in love, not a secret waiting to explode. But secrets don't stay buried. As we walked back to the house, I saw Greg's car in the driveway, hours earlier than expected. My heart sank. Julian's grip on my hand tightened, then let go. "Stay calm," he whispered, but his voice was strained. We walked in to find Greg in the living room, his face unreadable. "Ethan, Julian," he said, his tone clipped. "Where were you?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. Julian stepped forward, his shoulders squared. "Just catching up," he said, but Greg's eyes narrowed. He wasn't stupid. He'd known Julian forever, and he knew me better than I sometimes knew myself. The air was thick with unspoken questions, and I felt like I was suffocating. Dinner that night was torture. Greg kept the conversation light, talking about his conference, but his eyes kept flicking between us. Julian was too quiet and I was too jumpy. By the time I escaped to my room, my nerves were shot. I texted Julian, "We need to tell him. Soon." His reply came quickly. "I know, but not yet." I didn't sleep that night either. The house felt like a pressure cooker, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it blew. The next week was a blur of stolen glances and whispered promises. Julian and I met in secret, at the park, in his car, anywhere we could steal a moment. Every touch felt like a rebellion, every kiss a defiance of the world that wanted to keep us apart. But the guilt was eating me alive. Greg deserved the truth, but the thought of losing him, of losing Julian, paralyzed me. It was Saturday when everything unraveled. Greg cornered me in the garage, his face a storm of hurt and suspicion. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, "what's going on with you and Julian?" I froze, my heart in my throat. I wanted to lie to protect what we had, but the look in his eyes stopped me. I stammered, and that was enough. He didn't yell. That was the worst part. He just looked at me, his eyes full of betrayal, and walked away. I found Julian in the backyard, staring at the sky like it held answers. "He knows," I said, my voice breaking. Julian's face crumpled, and he pulled me into his arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted to hurt him." We decided to tell him everything that night. It was the hardest conversation of my life. Greg sat across from us, his face a mask of pain as Julian explained. How it started, how we tried to fight it, how we couldn't. "I love him," Julian said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "And I'm so sorry, Greg." Greg didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was cold. "You're my best friend, Julian. And you're my son, Ethan. How could you do this?" I wanted to explain, to make him understand, but the words wouldn't come. He left the room, and the silence he left behind was deafening. For days, Greg barely spoke to us. Julian and I clung to each other, but the guilt was a shadow we couldn't shake. I started to wonder if love was worth this kind of pain, if we'd made a terrible mistake. But then I'd look at Julian, see the way he fought for us, and I knew I couldn't let go. A month later, the house was still a battlefield, but something had shifted. Greg started talking to me again. Not much, but enough to give me hope. One night, he asked me to sit with him on the porch. The air was crisp, the stars bright against the Syracuse sky. "I don't understand it," he said finally, his voice soft, "but I see how you look at him, and I see how he looks at you." I held my breath, waiting for the verdict. "I'm not okay with this," he continued, "but I'm trying. You're my son, Ethan. And Julian, he's family too." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, and he squeezed my shoulder. A small gesture, but it felt like everything. Julian and I moved slowly, carefully. We didn't hide anymore, but we didn't flaunt it either. Syracuse wasn't ready for us, but we were ready for each other. We found a small apartment downtown, a place to build something new. It wasn't perfect. There were still whispers, still judgment, but we had each other, and that was enough. One evening, under the same autumn tree where we'd first held hands, Julian pulled me close. "I'd do it all again," he said, his voice fierce. "Every risk, every fight. For you." I kissed him, the world fading away, and knew he meant it. Love wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Every painful, beautiful moment. As we walked back to our new home, hand in hand, I realized something. The world could judge us, reject us, try to break us, but we'd found something stronger. A love that didn't just survive the storm but grew stronger because of it. And that, I knew, was something I'd never forget.